my Teams is misbehaving a little bit today, but we can proceed.
Oh, all right, great. So we can pick up from our last meeting. I presented the business process model revision that I had made, and then Mike also presented some industry energy management business process model example that he had found. And we were really looking for some participants to see if there were any pieces of the BPMN that they wanted to dig into for their utility, and maybe flesh out what it looks like for themselves. And we'll continue to look for opportunities for utilities to take pieces of the big overarching energy management for our organizations. So today we have David Ponder he has prepared some first draft of his business process model as it related to the policy side of the energy management at his organization. So with that, I'll turn it over to David to see what he has.
All right. So, and you give me too much credit. Michael Burnett really did help do the business process modeling part of this. We started with this conceptual model, which is, again, don't give me too much credit. This is really just an adaptation of the ISO 50001 energy management system business process model with a slight twist, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And I think it's really puts our the work we did in context. So over the last couple of years, we had we called a energy management strategy team, basically a set of folks from across different parts of the organization come together and talk about best practice in energy management, and why are we doing what we're doing, and what do we want to be doing, and what is the future of our energy management to look like. So that's this kind of defined organizational context piece. I'll circle back to the leadership commitment piece in a moment, because we kind of stalled out a little bit there, but I don't think that precludes us from doing some work down the line. So you all this slide may even look familiar to some of you, because I shared it last fall in an overview of some of the work that we've been doing. So what I did is I worked with Michael to kind of talk through what this process looks like, and then he took time to put it in this business process modeling diagram, basically in a swim lane, where the rows across represent different kind of parts of the organization, or individuals within the organization, or teams in the organization. And so give people just a second to kind of like consume this, and then I'll start walking through it. So essentially what we do here is we start with sort of, a periodic refresh of the organization's overall strategic mission, vision, values kind of process. And part of our challenge was we actually, when we initiated our review of kind of how we wanted to approach energy management, we were about a year ahead of the rest of the organization refresh, or we were really late. Or another way to think about it is we were really late in trying to plug into the prior version of that, right? But nonetheless, the thought is at some point, the organization says energy management is an important strategic priority. We should be doing something about it, right? And then from there, what you would do is go do some work to understand better what that might mean for your organization. So what might energy management look like for you? What are the things that are important to you? What are the things that you're trying to accomplish? What are the internal challenges that you're facing? What are the external threats or opportunities that you're facing? So what we really did was some sort of a classic SWOT analysis. As part of this, we defined some existing business processes, really just trying to understand the work that we've done leading up to now, and what do we want the future to look like, and what are the things that we need to work on in order to kind of move energy management forward. So that's this sort of defining organizational context. And then at that point, there's this sort of point at which you go back to your leadership to sort of present a vision of what it is that you want to do, right? And your leadership says either go for it, run into a little bit of a barrier here, in part because we've been reimagining how we do decision making in our organization, and what it means, and to have systems, and we do think of energy management as a system, but again, sort of in the energy management space, we were a little bit ahead of the rest of some parts of the organization in terms of, we had defined what we thought the energy management system might look like, and a process that we would go through to implement that. But the rest of the organization hadn't sort of come to a shared understanding about what it meant to have cross-functional systems across the organization, right? And what the process might even be to propose implementation of such a cross-functional system, how we would define that, what our process would be to make approvals about that. And so we've gotten a little bit stalled out here in terms of getting a formal leadership commitment. That said, it does not mean that we aren't going to continue to do some of the fundamental work that we need to do. It just means we're going to have to sometimes rely more on the persuasion of our arguments rather than the directive of top level leadership, if that makes sense. So it just means we have to do a little bit more work to make the case for why doing the work that we're proposing to do makes sense to the rest of the business, and recruit others to participate in that. And so, so ideally you get some sort of a formal endorsement and commitment, and then at that point you have what I would call an energy steering team, which is representation from across the organization. So for us, that would be sort of energy and sustainability group where I sit, our process engineering, our capital delivery folks, operations, maintenance, SCADA, what we call our program supervisors, which kind of like do our kind of work instructions and SOPs and things like that. And then you'd convene a group of folks with that representation, and then you would go through a process of performance assessment and goal setting. And you would do this really at a facility by facility level. And at this point, I want to switch slides actually a little bit. And this is where I would like to go next with Michael in terms of fleshing out this model. It's really fleshing out what we mean in this box, because I hope all of this looks really familiar from what Eric presented last time. It's a very similar conceptual model, but where I really think we can dig in a little bit and bring some more clarity is what does it mean to assess performance and set goals, right? And so we separately have started sort of mapping out what we mean when we say assess performance and what are the tasks and the subtasks involved in that. Because it's not just a matter of saying, let's pick a number, we're going to reduce energy by 20%. What we really want to do with the energy management system is take a really strategic view and deliberate approach to targeting those energy savings and energy management opportunities that kind of present the best value to the organization. And in order to be able to do that, it really starts with having a really clear understanding of where you're using energy, why you're using energy in those places, and what the opportunities for improving performance or efficiency in an equipment group or a process might be. And so, in fact, what we're doing currently is going through this process of sort of data collection and data identification, right? So where do we have power monitoring equipment? Where are we using energy? Where do we have gaps in our power monitoring for processes that we know consume significant energy? What are the parameters and variables that influence our energy consumption? What are the tags that go along with that? And then sort of what we're working towards is sort of this sort of data assessment and improvement plan, right? Because it may turn out that a process that we want to better understand our energy consumption, the power monitoring equipment that we have for that process actually includes several other, process elements that might skew our ability to really ascertain what the energy use is. But maybe it's base load lighting and it doesn't really matter. That's kind of like what we're trying to figure out right now. And so is going through this initial kind of data collection and understanding of kind of where we have data and where we might need to improve our data collection. And then from there, the idea is to do some analysis, right? To develop what I would call energy profiles. So what are, really mapping out our energy consumption by major process or end use areas. And then from there, identify what we are referring to as SEUs. And again, this is jargon that we've borrowed from the ISO 50001 model, which is, significant energy uses. So what are the areas with substantial energy consumption or with considerable energy savings improvement? And the idea is to cover at least 80% of the use in a particular facility. And then from there, what we really want to do is really start to identify what are the performance indicators for these processes, for these significant energy uses, to be able to put that energy use in context, right? Because kWh or therms or kW tells you how much energy you're using, but it doesn't tell you how efficiently you're using energy. So we want to kind of develop some measure of an efficiency metric, essentially, to kind of define the amount of work being done with that amount of energy and be able to set some goals and targets around those performance metrics and to be able to monitor that over time. So we think of this as sort of an initial baseline data collection, data reporting process, right? And then sort of once you have sort of that baseline set of information done, then you might move into what I call the improvement phase. And what would that look like, right? And so you know, again, this is all still really conceptual, but the idea is that at a facility level, you convene a conversation with folks and determine collectively what it is that you're seeking to assess and what the criteria are for decision making, right? So you know going in that you're all on the same page about what it is that you're looking for and how you're going to make decisions about whether to move an idea about an improvement opportunity forward or not. And this is different for us because in the past, what we've done is we've just sort of gone in and done energy assessments like a compressed air study or a recommissioning study or, you know, something to that effect. And without doing the groundwork first to kind of get everybody there, it was just sort of like we would parachute in, do the study and say, ta-da, here, do this work, right? And people weren't all on the same page about why we were doing that, why that was the system we were looking at, why it was something to care about, or what the decision making was. We didn't have the context for, you know, what's available in a maintenance budget, what's coming up for capital plans around that particular facility, and where these kinds of assessments fit into all of that. So the idea is to really step back and kind of bring others along in that process. And then, so you then sort of identify those systems that you want to assess, whether that's compressed air, steam, pumps, aeration, whatever it is. And then you kind of define and agree on an approach for doing that assessment or audit. And then you have a plan for conducting the audit. You know, what is the process? What is the timeline? You know, and you go out, you do the data collection. Some of this kind of moves more is, I would say, it seems like a lot of steps, in particular in this part, but it's not as many as you might expect. It's not as much work as you might expect. But the idea here is that everybody, again, on the same page about the approach and how the work is going to be performed. And then, you know, you go out and you start doing the assessment, right? And then you might, and I just want to say that when I was first conceiving of this kind of approach, it was before we had heard, I think it was folks out in Portland talking about the treasure hunt approach. I've not yet had a chance to kind of revisit this concept with that in mind, because I think there's a lot of opportunity, you know, with that concept to kind of, you know, because this is really a really kind of, I don't know, maybe a little too rigid of an approach, too rigid of a framework, and that there may be some kind of flexibility that we need to bring in, where we just say, hey, what's out there, and what can we do quickly? What are the quick hits, quick wins we can get? And instead of maybe necessarily being too structured, I think there's a balance, and I have to kind of think through some of that. But in the end, the idea is that you have a report and you identify what you're going to implement, and then you develop an implementation plan with that, and roles and responsibilities for doing it. You go out and you implement it, and then you document and you standardize what you're doing. And then I've got down here this kind of this area, which is, I think, again, still in development, because the idea is that you know, we've established a baseline of our performance. We've now started to identify what some improvement opportunities are. Then from there, what we could really do is start to set improvement goals, right? And what is it that we expect to achieve? And I deliberately put this part at the end of this kind of front end, because in the past, what we've said is in 10 years, we're going to save 50% of the energy that we use, or we're going to reduce energy by 50% or 20% in 10 years. And it was just sort of like a number that people picked, off the top of their head without really thinking through, was that doable? Was that achievable? It was what I would call a top-down goal instead of a bottom-up goal. And what I'm hopeful for is that through sort of the identification of improvement opportunities, what we start to do is compile and build a list of improvement measures that we're going to put in place, and some expectations about what the energy savings might be there, and then base our goal setting on that rather than some arbitrary go out and save 20%. So that's what I want to do next with Michael, is kind of come back through and flesh out what I just kind of walked through in that spreadsheet in this piece. And then, turning back to the rest of this, the rest really then is carrying it out, right? So once you've, and we started to a little bit about monitoring and measuring and implementation and standardizing in here, right? So some of those about kind of touch on each of these steps, right? So, but the idea is that if you can kind of identify improvement measures, go after them, standardize the work, continue to monitor and measure your performance, continue to then kind of have a feedback loop, right? Here, right, where you've implemented, you're measuring your performance, and then the idea is, well, if you've put a measure in place and something starts to drift or deviate, then you get this corrective preventative action step, right? And you would go out and you would correct that. So if something isn't performing as expected, you might go back and say, well, why aren't we seeing the results that we expected to see? Is it because we've drifted in the way we've, are people following the standardized practice that we have put out there? If not, let's take, that corrective action to kind of to put things back. And then at some point in this process, you have some sort of a review. And I think of this one as sort of all of this ultimately gets written down, right, in a cookbook, and everything's documented. And periodically, annually, every other year, you would go through and you would have sort of some reflection on whether or not you're achieving the things that you said you'd set out to achieve. Are you maintaining the data systems? Are you maintaining? Are you moving forward the implementation opportunities that you've identified? And those sorts of things. And based on that, you have a correction cycle internal to the system. And then beyond that, you'd have some sort of a periodic review from leadership, right? Because as you remember early on, a lot of, the path that we set forward on is based on an understanding about what our strategic opportunities and weaknesses are, right, at a moment in time. Well, things change over time, technology changes over time, people change over time. So, energy prices change over time. So maybe things aren't the same in 5 years as they were last year. And it might be a time to revisit whether or not the overall energy management program is still on the right path. And we would have some sort of element of leadership review to reinitiate this process of kind of assessing our organizational commitment. Maybe the organization decides that this is no longer that important, right? Who knows? Or maybe the organization decides we need to do something entirely different, right? We have a heavy emphasis on energy efficiency and our current vision of energy management. Or maybe the leadership at some point in the future says, well, that's all good and well, but really what we want to do is we want to be more like what they're doing it out in Denver, and we want to be recovering energy from our system to provide to our community. That requires a whole different view of how we do energy work.
David?
But that's got to come from a strategic perspective. Yeah,
David?
go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to let you know some people have their hands up and are asking questions and just
and I can be done talking.
No. You don't have to be done talking. Let's just take a minute.
Yeah.
And see questions, and then you can proceed. I'm not trying to stop you. I'm just
I was pretty much done there anyway. So.
Okay. Well, there's a question in the chat from Scott. What are a few examples of improvements that you're looking at?
Yeah, so we haven't gotten that far. I know that in my mind, lighting continues to be an opportunity for efficiency improvement that we can pursue. Building controls, HVAC upgrades are something that we're in the process of looking at. Pump optimization, I think, is an opportunity for us to think about. And then meanwhile, other parts of the organization are continuing to pursue, say, improvements in our aeration system, which, as I would assume most of us understand, are the biggest energy consumers for us in wastewater treatment.
Okay, and Mia Shabanovic had a question. Have you considered monitoring and measuring tools? How will staff engage and adjust? And does that look like a reporting software or meetings with process owners? I can read it again because,
I see it there. Again, I would say we haven't gotten quite that far. I get torn, right? I think actually what I would say is, let me pull something else up, because I think I do have a slide that actually better answers that question. Give me just a minute. Let's see. And let me make sure I'm sharing this the right way. This is the way I think about reporting. And I think where we report and what we report is going to vary depending on the audience that we're speaking to in the organization. So this concept really talks about sort of, we know we need to have reporting at a very high level, strategic level. I imagine that's kind of like total spend, total energy use, sort of maybe a measure of how we're doing in terms of how many facilities have we led through a process, that kind of a thing. Very high level. Then at the facility level, we have business unit managers and assistant business unit managers, or maybe that are really interested in kind of how is my facility performing, right? And there you might have another version of some of these aspects of reporting, you know, on cost, use, practice. And then you might have, as you get lower down, you might even have process level measures, and that is going to look at like something different. And then you might have equipment level measures. And I guess to respond to Mia's question, I think the tool that we use to share this information out is going to be different depending on the audience that we're talking to, right? So for me, the ideal place for sort of this equipment process level reporting is really within our SCADA GUI, the HMI, because that's what those audiences engage with every day, right? They are looking at their screens to look at the process. And so I think that's where that information needs to be presented. How we get it in there, that's kind of TBD. I think some of the higher level reporting, we're probably looking at something in Power BI or some other dashboarding tool. I hope that clarifies the question a little bit, and feel free to speak up.
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your answer. We have been kind of struggling with this within the city of Portland, and we have been advised by the consultants that the only solution to really integrate these different data sources is the use of I think they're using a term, a data lake, where all the data is going to be scrubbed and dumped into something that looks like a data lake hosted by Amazon or something like that.
Yep. And so for us, that, you know, so from where I sit in the organization from an energy management lens, I'm kind of waiting for the rest of the organization to kind of make up its own mind about exactly those sorts of things. We, in the meantime, kind of pull some things together. Sort of what we're currently working on is really more of the higher level reporting. And I think, you know, Eric's kind of Power BI dashboard is a good example of that. Power BI is pretty useful in terms of bringing in disparate resources, but disparate data sets, but it isn't perfect. And we've already encountered issues in trying to do that. And, you know, what does it mean to bring in data out of our SCADA system into that as a reporting platform? And yeah, this whole concept of data lakes and digital twins, it's an ongoing dialogue for us. And, you know, the challenge for us, for me, is the rest of the organization has to make some decisions about what it's going to do there, and then we'll make, you know, the best use of the tools that we're provided.
George also has his hand up, and then Scott.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, thanks, David. This is really good. I'll try and keep it brief. As you were going through this, could you go back to your BPM slide?
Yeah, let me reset the sharing here. Yeah.
So as you're going, so it's all very reflective of ISO, and as you may recall, Metro Vancouver's had an corporate energy management policy since 2014, and we cite ISO 50001. So I saw a huge red flag go up when you were talking about your obtain leadership commitment.
Mm-hmm.
bubble there, and recognizing that every organization is different. But working at Metro Vancouver in energy management, this is my third energy management job, and one of them was in consulting where I had several clients trying to do this. And that bubble, there's two commonalities. We never got that bubble ticked off for any of my previous jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately programs stalled. So it was either because we weren't getting that commitment, or the other commonality was me. So maybe I was the problem, but not getting that commitment. As I don't know if you recall the whatever, I talked for a long time about what we've been doing for the last 12 years.
I do.
As we're going through this BPM, I was going in my head, yeah, we've done that. Yeah, we've done that. Yeah, we've done that. Yeah, we've done that. But we never got that commitment. So that I just caution you, and I caution everybody to not forget about that step. I don't want to suggest that it should stop everything,
Right.
but you should, in my opinion, you should always be going back to that and making sure that you get it. Because what we're doing now in year 12, we are in year 12 of our program, is we're doing a reset. So we're back at the yellow block right now.
Yep.
And what we need, part of what we need to do is assign accountability for getting stuff done. That's one of the things that was actually missing in our policy.
Mm-hmm.
And setting
roles and responsibilities.
Roles and responsibilities are super important, and it needs to be very clear right at the beginning. And I liked something that you said, which is what I've been saying to my management for the last 7 years, is if this isn't important, just tell me, right? And that's all about setting sorry, I can't remember the exact terminology used on your slide, but it's putting, where does energy management fit into everything else we're trying to do that are all very, very, valiant initiatives, right? So
yeah, George, what you're saying, it totally resonates. And it is, I'm trying to make the most of where we are, and kind of continue to make some incremental progress. While we figure out some of our reimagining of how we integrate work across the organization. But I don't disagree with you that getting that leadership commitment is fundamental, because so much is rolled up inside that notion of leadership commitment. To me, it is really that it's an endorsement of an approach, right? It is because otherwise you get the says who, right? If I go out to a plant and say, I want to have a meeting or a conversation, and I want you to commit time and resources of your staff to engage in this process, and somebody says who, I need to be able to go back and says the organization, right? So it does cause me pause, and it's something that I will continue to try and make happen. I think we're just in a kind of a weird space with our leadership team in order to kind of get them to do that. So it's, what do you do in the meantime?
Yeah, and I said, it's not, I'm not suggesting that you slam the brakes on everything, but just
Yep, no.
recognizing that because every time you sit down at a meeting, what I would like to be able to do is at the beginning of every meeting is say, this is why you're here, and this is how it links to what we've been
Absolutely.
clearly asked to do as
Right.
an initiative, right?
Yep, exactly. And, you know, we spent all this time and energy kind of coming up with this kind of, you know, program concept, and just, you know, I think what I struggle with is how do I convince the organization that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? Because as you said, George, there are lots of things that, you know, our organizations are working on and focused on and dealing with. And, you know, how do we make, even though this may not be our, you know, in our top 5 priorities, how do we still do the work, even if it is not like a leading priority?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And so much of it comes back to the KPIs, right? Like,
right.
We have to agree on what our strategic plan is, and then we measure it. And if, yeah, it's not rocket science, but you can't do it alone, right? And
right. Well, and that's the thing is, for me, is, you know, I describe all of this work, and that's really, for me, the fundamental thing is there's no way I could do all of this by myself. I could never, you know, and it requires, you know, and this slide I think really shows it. It requires a whole, you know, input and resources from across the organization to make it work, right? You know, the energy manager can kind of be a hub or a facilitator or a convener or a coordinator, but they can't, you know, not my decision to, you know, spend money to replace light bulbs, right?
Yeah.
So I need to have other people from across the organization involved in the conversation and in the dialogue.
Yeah. No,
Thank you.
I'm gonna actually use your slides, so thanks for doing it.
Yeah, and I think this slide deck that I'm sharing currently, which is you know, this other, the BPM model was kind of derivative of, I think we shared that out early in after my presentation last October. So it should be available in whatever the SharePoint resource is, or that we have for the WISE team.
I
If
will look.
not, if you can't find it, George, just send me an email and I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's posted. Let me ask just you guys on this conversation, because I'm from the perspective that I haven't gotten the formal executive leadership direction, but at the same time, I haven't let it really prevent me from trying to move forward. And all the challenges you guys have said, you know, I don't have the budget to go in and change all the light bulbs or do all these different things. But can you use, you know, some of the collateral of how much you spend on energy and the fact that there is an energy manager? I mean, the position of energy manager is an endorsement of the organization that energy management's important. So I haven't felt a lot of pushback. I get pushback on the work, but I don't get too many people feeling that it's not important when you put out the numbers of how much we spend and that there's somebody here looking at it. And maybe that's organization to organization, but I kind of
I agree. I mean, everybody, I think that's part of our challenges. It's a bit of we're a victim of our own success in the past, right? So there are other folks that have been in this role and position that have come before me, and we have, you know, instilled across the organization the concept and the notion that managing energy costs is important, and it's there, and there are folks that are, you know, actively, you know, how do we coordinate that work, and how do we keep each other informed about what's going on and kind of be able to keep our eyes on the big picture while also pursuing individual projects. So yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Eric. I mean, and agree that, you know, the fact that we are here in the roles that we're in is implicit in some sort of, you know, some implicit endorsement of the approach. The challenge, I think, that, you know, George and I are talking about is, and it may be different from organization to organization, is that how far can you go, and, you know, could you be getting more done, and if you have this kind of more specific and direct instruction that this is a priority and this is the way we do the work.
Scott has a question. If he's had his hand up for about 20 minutes, so just let's give Scott a chance.
You just gotta like shout out.
Okay, so David, this is excellent, and I really like how you're calling this a systems approach. And maybe Cello would want to chime in on what I'm going to ask about. But it turns out that in connection with business process development, we have identified, you know, a model, basically an assessment tool that can be used to do a lot of what you were describing in the context that you were dealing with. A lot of those elements are there to ask those important questions to make sure that you have that. It might be useful for you to go through what has been developed to see, you know, if everything is covered, or maybe there's some things that you're doing that could be added to it. For example, you know, the other thing is our methodology tends to be, you, from a business process standpoint, is that we define what your as is condition is, and then you define what the to be state is that's desired using the stakeholders input and everything. It looks like, but you could verify this, that what you're doing is developing a to be state. You're not, and you're having a lot of conversations and all at different levels, at the facility level and top management and other levels, you know, about this to define a to be state, that, but you're not really documenting what your current state is. Is that true or not?
Well, we did in our review of our existing process, and we actually did it by business unit. So we had, for example, our energy management strategy team, which was charged with developing the to be state, Scott. We had representatives, say, from maintenance or process engineering or capital delivery or sustainability, kind of talk about how they currently see their process as it relates to energy play out. So we had capital go through, talk about it, but what was really clear was that was all, it was all very siloed, right? Right. And not integrated. And so that was one of the findings from our our strategic review, is that we needed to have a more integrated approach, a more cross-functional approach. So we did actually I just haven't shared it here.
Sure. So you've kind of looked at, here's what we've got, here's what we collectively we need, and now here's how we're going to get there. That kind of methodology.
Yep.
Yeah, you've done. And, you know, I do think going back also to the tools that have been developed, and it could be a quick review even on your part to say,
yeah, I'm happy
here are some elements, and have you covered these, or are there things that you're doing that are really cool that maybe, you know, could be added to what we've done too. And Cello could chime in on this as well.
Sure.
Well, a couple of things really quickly, because we don't have that much time left on the call today. What Scott is talking about is it's sort of shown on this chart where if you look at processes, it starts here on where it says what is the scope of improvement, and if it has to do with process and technology, then we would select a business process, then conduct look into it, and that's the assessment Scott is talking about, and then it may need to we may need to improve process documentation before going and looking at technology. So the tool he's talking about looks at the business, these two highlighted things. And I just quickly want to say something, go to our next item on the agenda, which is, David, you have provided a very nice model on the high level to really the next step would be to really break this up into smaller chunks that people can take on and then look into it in a bit more detail. So what I'm showing you is something that has been posted. These are some examples of business process models under examples, this one that says MWD, and it has this set of business process models that are a little bit more detailed. And they all have to do with revenue meters and different processes associated with revenue meters. So we would probably, to make where the rubber meets the road, is on a more detailed level. So
I agree.
So if we take the higher level model that you have and then start breaking it down hierarchically, I can show you some examples of, for example, resolve service connection discrepancies, and then go into a fair amount of detail on just a second on what that who's involved and what that what needs to get, what are the activities, who what the roles are in different systems. This includes 5 different systems here, and also like here, it says on the left side of the service connection discrepancy form, there should be more of these things so we know what the artifacts are that are generated. So one of the things that we wanted to do in today's meeting is to start a conversation. If people look at that higher level process that we've looked at, that they can maybe think about the piece that they can take on within that 1 or 2 levels below, and then start developing models that are a bit more in depth and detail, and where we can really identify, like this one is, for example, also from the revenue meters, you can see how many are involved. So I just would like to start a conversation about if there are volunteers or ideas, and if not today, then to maybe get back to us, to Scott and Eric and me, and we can start coordinating that because and figuring out how to go forward, because it'll be so helpful if each person took on a different part of this broader process and got into more detail.
So
really...
I really agree. And Michael and I had talked, and I think then what we had hoped is to take that spreadsheet that I was sharing with, which kind of, in my mind, breaks up some of that sort of assess performance, set performance measures pieces into kind of more discrete chunks. That's I want to continue to work with him to kind of like define that into a more specific process model.
Yeah, and so if it'll be great if we can post, what we have right now into the folder for today's meeting, and then we'll post a video as well, and so that people can maybe think if there's a part of that process that is kind of important for their utility, and maybe just start looking into these sub processes in more detail. And I want to see, how people feel about this. Eric, George, David, James, and so forth.
Well, I agree, Cello. We need volunteers, but but I'm also happy to continue developing for. I think the spreadsheet in particular has some really great things. I kind of got the impression, David, that those processes aren't fully defined, and
Yep.
some of those activities are the same with me, is that they're recognized but not defined.
Exactly.
And like the baselining, I think
Yep.
all of us agree that's a humongous key piece. We can't even set our goals and things like that without proper baselining, and it's not as easy as setting a baseline. There's a lot of nuance to it. So some of those things I'm happy to dive into as well. David, you and I should probably talk, maybe even with Michael, and take
I was going to
pieces.
say, yeah, maybe you could take a look at that spreadsheet, and we can set something up with Michael and anyone else that wants to join in as like a working session. I think that's a good idea. I certainly could use the other brain power.
Yeah. So, does anybody want to join this? If you can either put it in the chat line now, or perhaps just let us know. Follow up with an email.
And we may even need to have something to define our needs to do these things.
Yes.
So here I have a lot more data than other organizations, so it may be good to have identify for future energy managers that come into an organization that don't have what they need to get it done. But thank
I
you.
really got to go. My next meeting's starting. Cheers, everybody.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you,
We can follow up.
Okay.
Yeah. So I see that James also will join us, which is great. So we'll send out an invite and schedule something to start really digging into these things.
Great. And yeah, thanks for everybody today. And obviously David's not on, but fantastic job with today's material. So we'll